Hello everyone. we need to talk about last night?" I froze for a moment, trying to piece together any memory of the previous evening, but nothing came to mind. I hadn't seen my neighbor, hadn't even thought about them, and certainly hadn't done anything that would warrant such an odd message. I stared at the note, feeling a strange sense of unease. I tried to brush it off as some kind of mistake, maybe it was meant for someone else. But the more I looked at it, the more it seemed impossible that it was anything but directed at me. My mind raced as I tried to think back to the night before. I had stayed in, watched TV, and then gone to bed early. No late-night visitors, no strange noises, nothing unusual at all. So why would my neighbor say we needed to talk? After a few minutes of staring at the note, I felt compelled to go over and speak with them. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, or perhaps they had mistakenly thought I was involved in something. I hadn't had any interaction with them before, other than the usual polite nods when we crossed paths in the hallway, so I was unsure how to approach them. But curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to knock on their door. I knocked 3 times, each tap of my knuckles seeming louder than the last. The silence on the other side made me uneasy, but I waited, hoping to hear movement. A few moments later I knocked again, a little harder this time. Still nothing. I checked the time early in the afternoon and figured they had to be home. Their car was parked outside, so they weren't gone for the day. I wasn't sure what to do next. Should I leave the note at their door? Should I try again later? I stood there for a while, my mind spinning with questions. What could they possibly want to talk about? Why didn't they just call or knock on my door instead of leaving such a cryptic message? And why did it feel like something wasn't right? I glanced up and down the hallway, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that had taken hold of me. Everything looked the same as always, but there was something off about the silence, as though the building itself was holding its breath. I decided to return to my apartment, hoping that when I checked again, my neighbor would have answered. I spent the rest of the day going about my routine, trying not to let the note dominate my thoughts. But it was no use. I couldn't stop wondering what they meant. The more I thought about it, the more I began to question everything. Had I missed something? Had I done something in my sleep that I couldn't remember? Later that evening, I was making dinner when I heard a knock at my door. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It was soft, tentative, but unmistakably there. I hurried to answer, half expecting it to be my neighbor, finally coming to explain. But when I opened the door, no one was there. I glanced down the hallway but saw nothing. Just the usual quiet, empty space. My heart raced as I stepped outside to check, but there was no one in sight. Puzzled, I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. Was it my mind playing tricks on me? Had I imagined the knock? I checked the locks on the door and double-checked the windows, making sure everything was secure. The silence in the apartment felt heavy now, suffocating, as though something was lurking just out of sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next day, I received another note. This one was taped to my door as well, but this time, the handwriting was different, more frantic, as though someone was in a hurry. It read, "You shouldn't have ignored me. It's too late now." I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the words. What did they mean? I hadn't ignored anyone, hadn't even spoken to anyone in days. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I stood there, staring at the note. I hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Should I call the police? Should I confront my neighbor if they were still home? I didn't know if I could trust my own judgment at this point. Everything felt strange, surreal, and I was beginning to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. I stood there for a while, trying to calm my racing thoughts, but nothing seemed to make sense. I decided to call the building manager. They didn't answer, but I left a message asking about my neighbor and whether they had been around. I had to wait for a response, but in the meantime, I couldn't stop thinking about the notes. The words "it's too late now" echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. That night, I went to bed early, hoping for some rest and to put everything behind me. But as the hours passed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of my apartment. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard something soft footsteps in the hallway, followed by the sound of something tapping on my door. I held my breath, listening intently. Was it my mind playing tricks again, or was someone really out there? I waited for what felt like hours, but the sound never came again. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, I woke up to a strange sensation, like I was being watched. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like eyes were on me, observing my every move. The silence of the apartment felt suffocating, and the notes seemed to linger in the air, haunting me with their cryptic messages. Later that day, I decided to check the building manager's office again. They were there, and this time they gave me some unsettling news. Apparently, my neighbor hadn't paid their rent for the last 2 months, and their lease was about to expire. No one had heard from them, and their apartment had been locked from the inside. The manager had tried to reach them several times, but there had been no response. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as the manager spoke. Had the notes been a desperate plea or help? Or had my neighbor known something I didn't? I wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. Something was very wrong, and I was somehow caught in the middle of it. I haven't seen my neighbor since that day. Their apartment remains empty, and the hallway feels quieter than ever. The notes stopped coming, but the unease never left. Every time I hear a knock on my door, my heart races, and I can't help but wonder if it's them, or something else entirely. Story 2. I woke up groggy, the pale light of the morning creeping through the curtains. I stretched, the remnants of a restless night still clinging to me. Reaching for my phone on the nightstand, I squinted at the screen, trying to shake off the sleepiness. My fingers brushed against the smooth surface as I unlocked it, expecting the usual flood of notifications. But something was off. My eyes scanned the screen in confusion. There were no messages, no missed calls, not even a single alert. I opened my contacts, thinking I must have somehow missed a call from someone important. But as I scrolled through, my breath caught in my throat. Every single name in my contacts had vanished. My entire list, the people I spoke to regularly, family, friends, co-workers, all of them were gone. Not a single number remained. Panic gripped me as I frantically swiped through the screen, hoping for some kind of error. Maybe it was a glitch, I thought. But as I stared at the empty list, my eyes landed on one name that made my heart skip a beat. At the very bottom, there was a contact I didn't recognize. The name was simple, no notes, no extra information, just a first and last name I couldn't place. I tapped on the contact in a daze. The phone number was unfamiliar too, a string of digits I had never seen before. My mind raced, trying to figure out who it could be. Maybe it was someone I had forgotten about, some forgotten acquaintance. But there was something unsettling about the way it appeared in my list. It felt out of place. I stood up from the bed, my legs a little shaky. My fingers hovered over the screen, unsure whether I should call the number. Something told me not to, that it wasn't safe, but the curiosity gnawed at me. I hesitated for a moment before tapping the call button, holding the phone to my ear. The ringing seemed to stretch on forever, each second feeling like an eternity. Then, finally, someone answered. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm. It was a low, monotone voice, almost robotic in its delivery. "Why did you call me?" the voice asked, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The tone was flat, devoid of any emotion or warmth. I didn't know what to say. My throat felt tight, my thoughts scattered. I don't know who you are," I stammered, trying to make sense of the situation. But the voice didn't respond immediately. It was as though the person on the other end was waiting for something, perhaps a response that wasn't coming. Then, finally, they spoke again, their words cold and detached. "You shouldn't have called me," the voice said. And before I could respond, the line went dead. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the phone, still holding it to my ear. My mind was racing, trying to understand what had just happened. Who was that? Why did they have my contact information? And why had I been so stupid as to call them? I quickly checked my call history, but there was no record of the number. It was as if the call had never happened at all. I tried to dismiss it, to convince myself it was just a prank or some kind of strange coincidence. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I needed to get some answers. I checked my phone settings, looking for anything that might explain why my contacts had disappeared. But everything seemed normal, aside from the missing list of names. It was like they had been erased, wiped away as if they had never existed. Even my cloud backup showed nothing. There was no way to restore the lost contacts. As the hours passed, unease settled in my gut. I couldn't stop thinking about the strange phone call, the voice that had spoken to me. It didn't feel like a mistake. It felt deliberate. Like someone was watching, waiting for me to make the wrong move. Later that evening, as I sat in my living room, the phone vibrated on the coffee table. My breath caught in my throat as I reached for it, half expecting another strange message or call. But when I checked, I found a text message from the same unknown contact. "I'm still here," it read, and I felt the blood drain from my face. I tried to respond, to ask who they were, but my fingers trembled too much to type. Every time I went to hit send, I found myself hesitating. What if this was something bigger than I could handle? What if this person had access to more than just my contacts? I deleted the message, hoping it would go away, but the anxiety gnawed at me. What did they want? How did they have my number? Why had my contacts been erased, leaving only them behind? The questions swirled in my mind, leaving me on edge. The next few days were a blur of tension. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach dropped. I didn't know if it would be another message from the unknown contact or something else entirely. But the strange feeling of being watched never left. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being monitored, that someone was lurking just beyond my reach. I even started checking the locks on my doors, making sure they were secure before bed. I felt like I couldn't trust anything anymore. My phone, once a harmless tool, now felt like an invasive presence, something that held secrets I couldn't uncover. Then, one evening, as I was scrolling through my contacts once more, something strange happened. The contact appeared again, but this time it was different. The name was still there, but now it had a message attached to it. "I'm closer than you think." A sense of dread washed over me. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. The message didn't make sense. It was impossible. How could they know that? How could they be near me? I quickly turned off my phone, a wave of panic rushing through me. I knew I couldn't keep ignoring this. Something was happening, and I wasn't sure I could stop it. All I knew was that I needed to get away from the phone, from whatever it was that had erased my contacts and left behind this mystery. But the fear that had been growing inside me only deepened. I couldn't run from it. It had already found its way inside, and somehow I knew it wasn't going to let me go. Story 3. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I first saw it. The sun was low in the sky, casting a soft golden hue over the neighborhood. I had just returned home from work and was standing by the door, fumbling for my keys, when I noticed something odd sticking out of the mailbox. It wasn't a letter or a package, at least not anything I recognized. Instead, it was a plain envelope, unmarked, with no name or return address. My curiosity piqued. I pulled it out, half expecting it to be another of those pointless flyers or advertisements that seemed to accumulate in my mailbox. But as soon as I unfolded the envelope, I felt something shift, as though the air had grown heavier. Inside was a map of my neighborhood, or what I thought was my neighborhood. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The streets were the ones I recognized, the parks, the shops, even the grocery store I passed every day. But there was something different about this map. The lines, though precise, weren't printed. They looked hand-drawn, the ink darker in some places, lighter in others. The route was marked in bold red, leading from my street to a location I didn't recognize. I stared at the map for a long time, trying to make sense of it. My mind raced with questions. Who had left this for me? And why? I looked around the neighborhood, half expecting to see someone watching me from behind a tree or through a window, but there was nothing. No one in sight. I tucked the map back into the envelope and went inside, closing the door behind me with a soft click. I placed the envelope on the table and sat down, my mind still whirling. The more I looked at the map, the stranger it seemed. The marked route didn't take me to a place I knew. It veered off toward the outskirts of town, where the roads grew less familiar. There were no landmarks, no obvious reason to go there. And the more I thought about it, the more it felt like an invitation. But an invitation to what? I debated with myself for a long time. Should I ignore it, toss the map in the trash, and forget it ever happened? Or should I follow the route, see where it led? My instincts screamed at me to ignore it. It was ridiculous, I thought. Who in their right mind would leave a map with a route like that marked so carefully? But there was something about it, something about the way it had been left so deliberately that made it impossible for me to just forget. That evening after dinner, I couldn't shake the thought. I found myself walking back to the table, the map still lying there. It beckoned me in a way I couldn't explain. With a sigh, I picked it up and examined it again. This time, I traced the route with my finger, following it from my house down the familiar street, then into the unknown territory beyond. I had to know what lay at the end of the path. I grabbed my jacket and left the house, slipping the map into my pocket. The night had fallen by the time I reached the beginning of the marked route. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows that made everything feel just a little bit more ominous. I walked slowly, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The familiar sounds of the neighborhood dogs barking, cars passing by seemed distant as I moved farther from the main road. As I reached the point where the map veered off into unfamiliar territory, the roads started to look different. The houses were spaced farther apart, their lawns overgrown. The streetlights were fewer and farther between, and the air had a strange, musty smell, like wet earth and decay. I stopped for a moment, looking around. This part of town didn't feel right. It felt abandoned, as though time had forgotten this place. The route on the map led me down a narrow alley, one that seemed to disappear into the darkness. I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder, but there was no turning back now. I had to know what was at the end of this path. The alley was quiet, too quiet, with only the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls of the buildings on either side. The feeling of being watched began to creep up my spine, a chill running through me as I continued walking. At the end of the alley, the road opened up into a small, deserted lot. The buildings around it were old, abandoned, their windows shattered and boarded up. The lot itself was empty, except for a small object placed in the center, just visible in the dim light. My heart began to race. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I couldn't stop now. I stepped into the lot, my breath coming in short gasps, and moved toward the object in the center. It was a small wooden box, weathered and worn, sitting innocently on the ground. There was no sign, no clue as to who had placed it there, or why. The map hadn't indicated anything about a box, but I knew it was what I had come for. The closer I got, the more the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I knelt down, examining the box carefully. There was no lock, no handle, just a plain, square shape. I reached out and touched it. The surface was rough, the wood cold beneath my fingers. As soon as I made contact, the hairs on my arms stood on end, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I didn't want to open it, but I had come this far. I needed to know what was inside. Slowly, I lifted the lid. Inside was a stack of photographs. They were old, yellowed with age, the edges frayed as though they had been handled over and over. I picked them up one by one, my stomach sinking as I realized the photos were of me. Each one was taken at a different time, some recent, some from months ago. There was one of me walking to work, another of me sitting in my backyard. There were even photos of me at the grocery store, taken from a distance. Whoever had been following me had been watching me for longer than I had realized. At the bottom of the box was a small note, folded neatly. My hand shook as I opened it, the handwriting cramped and uneven. It read, "You were never meant to find this." I couldn't breathe. My heart raced in my chest, my mind whirling. I had to get out of there, away from whatever this was. I slammed the box shut and ran, not looking back until I was safely back in my car, doors locked, windows up. I started the engine and drove home in a daze, my mind unable to process what had just happened. When I got back to my house, I locked every door and window, double-checked everything. The map was still in my pocket, but I didn't want to look at it again. I didn't want to think about the photographs or the note. I didn't want to think about how someone had been watching me. That night, I barely slept, the images from the box flashing through my mind. The map, the photographs, the note, they had all been a warning. But from whom? And why? I had no answers, only questions, and the unsettling feeling that whatever this was, it wasn't over. It had only just begun. Story 4. I woke up, feeling disoriented, and reached for my phone, hoping to check the time and see if I had gotten enough sleep. As the screen lit up, I saw a notification from my fitness tracker. It read, "Great run. 3.2 miles completed at 2:13 a.m. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't remember going for a run the night before. I hadn't left the house, not even for a walk, and certainly not at 2 a.m. The last thing I remembered was falling asleep on the couch after watching a movie. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the haze, and opened the app to see the details. The run wasn't just an error. It was documented with precise details, distance, pace, and even the route. The app showed my pace was faster than what I had ever managed, and I had completed the run in an impressive time for my usual speed. The map even pointed the exact route I would take when I did go for a jog around the neighborhood. I knew this path well. It was my usual route when I tried to get in some exercise. But I hadn't taken it last night, of that I was sure. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Was it a glitch? Could the app have somehow tracked a run I didn't actually take? I checked the details again, zooming in on the map. The route was accurate, the time exactly what the tracker said, but I had stayed home. I had watched TV until I fell asleep, and I hadn't gone anywhere. The more I thought about it, the less logical it seemed. I hadn't been awake at 2 a.m., so how could I have run that distance without even remembering it? My heart raced. Was I sleepwalking? Could I have gotten up in my sleep and gone for a run? I had heard of people sleepwalking before, but never something this active. A run with detailed tracking seemed impossible. But what if it was true? I stood up, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. I had to check my shoes. The idea of me running without remembering it was unsettling. So I walked to the entryway and looked at my running shoes, which I always left neatly by the door. They were still there, undisturbed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I needed to understand what had happened, so I decided to check my security cameras. I had cameras outside the house, set up for peace of mind. Maybe they would give me some clue, some piece of evidence that would explain this strange run. I logged into the camera app on my phone, scrolling through the night's footage. The timestamp matched the run's time. At exactly 2:13 a.m. I saw someone move across the frame. A figure in jogging clothes running down the street. It was hard to make out their features, but I could tell it was a person, moving with a pace that seemed too fast for someone just out for a leisurely jog. The figure continued down the street, out of the camera's view, and I watched in stunned silence. I couldn't breathe for a moment. The person on the video wasn't a stranger. They looked like me. It wasn't just the clothes, the same running jacket and sneakers I wore. It was the way the figure moved, the rhythm of